My name is Jennifer Gray Thompson, and I am the CEO of After the Fire. Welcome to the podcast, How to Disaster: Recover, Rebuild, and Reimagine. In this podcast, we bring you the very best practices, best hearts, and great ideas from other disaster-affected communities. Thank you for joining us. And we're back with another episode of How to Disaster. And today we have on the program with us, Jake Bentz. I met Jake about maybe 3 or 4 months ago in Santiam Canyon. And Santiam Canyon experienced a mega fire in 2020. And it was part of that unprecedented wildfire season in Oregon. We went up there to meet with emergent leaders and public sector leaders, and really to see how are they navigating their wildfire recovery, and to see where we can be of help. Jake really stood out to me because we went to the long-term recovery area and sat down and had a meeting. And as we were doing this meeting, I'm looking around at all the shelves where their donations are, and I'm thinking to myself, wow, this is the most organized donation center I've ever seen in my life. Donations are a beast in disaster. If it's not done right, then donations turn into a secondary disaster. What often happens is that when people want to give physical things to other people who are suffering, those physical things often don't match the need at that time. So you have all of this goodwill that's coming in during and after a disaster, but how do you actually organize that? What are some best practices? I was really interested also because Jake is very young. He just finished high school, and then he comes in and he takes on this sort of major undertaking of how do you actually, organize your disaster donations in a way that doesn't become, a compound issue. And he's done a fantastic job. So I asked Jake if he would come on today to talk to the How to Disaster podcast about how he entered into this space, and also what best practices does he use to manage his donations, because it truly is an impressive feat. And if you want to learn more about Jake Bentz and his amazing work of his colleagues and all the things they're doing in Central Oregon, which we think are actually some great best practices that are very helpful to newly fire affected communities, I strongly encourage you to look up Santiam Disaster Services, and you can learn more if you visit their website at www.santiamhospital.org. Once again, welcome to the podcast, Jake Bentz.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you for having me. So happy to be here today.
So I was really impressed with everybody that we met in Santiam Canyon. You have so many incredible leaders there, and really, one of the stories that I told at the beginning when I was introducing you is, sitting in that meeting at Santiam Disaster Services and looking around, and part of my brain though left the meeting just to look at the wonder of the donation setup that you had created. So I want to get into that today specifically, and also to talk about what it means to be an emergent leader in a disaster and the tremendous difference a person can make. But I'd like to start off by tell us your fire story.
Yeah, well, our fire story, I live personally, our fire was in the Santiam Canyon, so I don't necessarily live in the canyon. I live about 5-6 miles outside of what people from around here would classify as the canyon, over a big hill. And so we did evacuate the night of, and went up to stay with some family. And while we were staying there, we started to see the videos come in, and pictures and phone calls from people. And we were sitting up in Portland, and I was just thinking of some way maybe we could get back down and start helping out, because a donation center had opened up right in Sublimity, right on the highway, right out of the canyon. And I had some connections there from my dad being in a service organization at one point. And so I think about 2 or 3 days later, we left, and I came back, and I showed up one day. I got an email from someone saying we were going to make gift baskets for first responders or something. And I showed up, and I walked in, and there's 70 people. Bear in mind, this is COVID time still, so it was a shocking thing to see. And there's 70 people in this room, and it's just this big event hall, just tables and tables of stuff. And so that was like 3 days after the fire. And I think for the next 40 days straight, with a couple of nights off in between, I was there with a lot of awesome people trying to make sense of the situation and organize donations. And people were coming in, survivors were coming in to get things, and things were going out, and trucks would come in, and the high school would be there to help sort things. And it was just like this big, I think I actually heard you say this first when you visited us, like the best of humankind was like, it was there. It was totally present. And it was this total synergy. And it's really funny because obviously that was a terrible, terrible month for so many people that we are so honored to help. But for us working there, it was just, we were so amazed by like the amount of phone calls we took and the amount of donations and all this. And now, like 18 months later, since we're all still working together, we kind of talk about it like we're a bunch of like washed up 40-year-olds in like a hometown bar talking about like the 85 title game. Like it's like, I have to like laugh when we talk about it just because we're so fond of that time. But and that just kind of progressed on and kept going. So that's kind of the right after the fire. I remember I had a specific moment. I guess it must have been a couple days in. Somebody showed up with this huge truck and we filled it with stuff, and we were going to drive up the canyon to another center that was open and give it out, because that's kind of where people it was more concentrated group of people there, and they needed water and clothes and stuff. And I remember, can anyone drive this big truck? I mean, it's got air brakes. It's like a 40-foot box truck or something. And I had no idea how to drive it, but nobody raised their hand. And so I had driven like a truck half that size. So I was like, hey, me, Jake, I can drive it. And I hop in with a buddy of mine. And we drive all the way up. I was super scared. And we got to the donation center. We unloaded it. And a guy actually complimented me on my driving. But what I remember the most is like when I got out of that truck, we were in Gates, we were in the town. And so that was the first time I really, that's where I kind of think of my fire story, is this moment of getting out of the truck and seeing the ashes, right? And seeing all the people, and just kind of like the commotion of what was happening. And it's funny, it was like a whisper, like right behind me, something was like, feels like we're going to be here a while. And it's interesting because at that point I had just been volunteering and I was planning on going down to school in 2 weeks. And here I am.
Well, for those, not everybody knows though, how old you are, Jake. So you might want to just let people know that too, because that's one of the things that I'm excited about having you on the podcast. I did not mention that part yet.
Yeah, I am the wise old age of 19 and like 2/5 years old. So here I am just, doing my best. But yeah, so just a total moment of like, I think this is going to be a little bit. And so here I am. So funny down the road to think back about that. But
you said you were going to leave for college. What? So you were 18 when this happened. Recently
18, newly minted. Yeah.
Right. And you had just graduated from high school, which of course also was done it was like year one of the pandemic. So there was a lot going on. So you find yourself 18 and about to go off to college, but then you don't go. So what in your fire story contributed to you putting off college?
Well, yeah, I started volunteering, and with COVID, thankfully, the classes were completely online, so I didn't have to choose right away. And I kept volunteering. And about a month and a half in, I sent an email to one of our program directors, Melissa. I kind of met her once way, way back. And I was like, hey, my school's starting. I really love coming in. Is there like, do you need capacity? Can you hire me? And just kind of a shot in the dark. And like 2 weeks later, I didn't hear anything. I just assumed, okay, gonna keep doing my classes, keep volunteering during the week and whatnot. But she emailed me back saying, can you start the next day? And so, and so I started, and I was doing both full time. I was taking, 18 credits and doing the full-time job. And after, I'm sure a lot of people who've done full-time school and full-time work, it's not the easiest, especially my first time being in college. And so I got to March of 2021. Yeah, about a year ago, and potential opened up for me to stay for even longer, to the point I am at now. And I just decided that school will be there, and that this disaster, at some point it's going to wrap up, and this experience and this awesome way to give back won't be there forever. So I went with the latter. I went with staying in town.
I love that. And I love your, noting that I actually love the part where the washed up 40-year-olds, I'm sitting here, 52, but it's fine.
Shoot.
But no, I'm not, no, that's hilarious. I am not offended whatsoever. Just so you know, I find it charming. But I don't think that I fully understood why people would romance or wax on about war necessarily, because when you haven't fought in a war, all you do is you see the destruction of it. But, it's doing that beautiful human experience that disaster can actually, and often does, almost always to a point of all of them, where there are these beautiful moments of human interaction. So I think it's so sweet that you did that. And what is it about that human interaction, how humans showed up for each other, that made it sort of almost an addiction, or almost like a compulsion to keep serving after?
Yeah, no, that's the perfect way to describe it. It was just the fact that I couldn't explain, like, just things kept popping up. Like every time we needed something, it would show up, like every single time. And even to this day, it happens. Like now I'm doing deliveries kind of on my own most these days. And I'll go out there delivering something to someone's new house. And I'm like, I have no idea how I'm going to get this refrigerator up 5 steps. Like it's me and a hand truck. And then like a truck will pull out and 2 random guys like, hey, could you use some help? Like every single time that this type of thing happens. And it was even more so in the beginning. So I think that, and I think was our team, was these awesome people that I had just gotten thrown into like a blender with almost. And, we really stuck together, and that was big too.
You do have a really amazing team. For those of you who are not familiar, Santiam Canyon is sort of in Central Oregon near Salem. Can you talk about the model of the SIT and who you work with? Because I do think that that's worth mentioning before we go into the details about managing donations.
Yeah, so before our fire, Santiam Hospital, which is who I work for, had kind of set up this program called service integration. And so they used the school districts as kind of boundaries, and they formed these 3 service integration teams. And the teams were basically people in the community, nonprofits, businesses, individuals who wanted to get involved with identifying unmet needs, finding solutions, and doing it all while working together. And so I kind of known about it while I was in high school, actually. But coming into a fire, it's like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what we need to do right now. So we had this network set up. And as I mentioned before, Melissa, she was the coordinator of it. And so when the disaster happened, people kind of already knew our phone number. And so for them, the donation center and the hospital were kind of separate for a little bit right there at the very beginning. The calls would come in to the hospital and to Melissa's line, and they go, hey, we need a place to stay tonight, and, hundreds of calls a day. And they started integrating that with the donation center that had popped up. And pretty soon, we merged the services. And those community partnerships were already there, from before the fire with the service integration teams. And so that's like, was the way I best understand it, kind of the way our long-term recovery groups are supposed to run. And so it's really unique that we had that set up, and it's just made it a whole lot easier. And we've just gotten a lot of service out to people. The hospital is the hub of it for sure. And that's who employs us, and kind of it facilitates our disaster team for sure.
And to let people know, this is a very rural area in Santiam Canyon. It's 4 towns were affected, and really a lot of damage. But the rural hospitals and rural schools play an outsized role in everything from resiliency to service delivery of essential things that we all need: healthcare and education, of course. We were very impressed by the SIT is what it's called. That's what I keep thinking in my brain. And we actually call it out as a best practice that we would wish that for other communities to engage with that practice and that model ahead of time. We will be having Melissa on the podcast as soon as we get that scheduled. But so we will go more deeply into that. But I just really want to call that out specifically because it's an amazing model, and it sort of did what a lot of communities, they go through a disaster and they set up an integrative team through an LTRG or something like that, or a VOAD. What they find is that they then have to build those relationships while everyone is incredibly stressed and traumatized from a disaster. The beauty of the service integration teams in Santiam Canyon is having that since 2017, when that was implemented. And then in 2020, when you had your mega fire, it actually sort of skipped the line in a lot of ways in this area of resiliency that, empowered and enabled your emergent leadership. You're not, and many other people who stood up and they're like, we think we can help. And there was already a model in place. And so that's, we love that for you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. It's actually kind of been like the best problem to have, is we've been trying to differentiate between like the disaster and the normal services, and bringing in more people into our long-term recovery group. It's been a good problem to be like, well, we already do this. Why do we have to reinvent the wheel? And so it's been awesome. So
that is awesome.
So
sure. I want to, sorry, interrupted you. I'm sorry.
No,
apologize.
Continue.
I just want to make sure that, so you come in to volunteer. We always say that emergent leaders, which are people who were not in that position before, can be the secret sauce to recovery. It's truly a remarkable thing to see who steps up and into certain spaces, who has the capacity, and who's able to do that. You have figured out donations in disaster. And what I told the audience before you came on is, for many, if not most communities, donations turn into a secondary disaster.
Yeah.
A burden even on the community, and people's urge to give often overshadows people's need to receive. And it's a very hard thing. Like, even to this day, when we've had quite a few fires here in Sonoma County, when I say to people, cash is king, and, gift cards are king, but be careful not to be offering people your couch whose homes just burned down, because they often can't accept that couch or that discount. So take us through your journey of becoming the maestro of post-disaster donation center.
I'm still trying to figure out how I did anything at all to have any hand in this. But you kind of hit exactly on it. The secret sauce is the people. I know you guys came into our donation center, and it was just, I had gotten it spruced up the morning of for you guys. And so it usually looks like that. But I had done a little organizing. I think right after the fire, we just had emergent leaders all over the place, and people who had prior experience that just kind of took extra things on. So we had city councilmen, and we had people from fraternal organizations offering up warehouses and trucks and equipment. Because at one point we were spread out between 5 locations with donations. And I mean, it wasn't a nightmare, but it was tough for sure. And when we thought about doing like a spreadsheet, track every single thing that comes in, every single thing that goes out, that didn't work out, especially with 5 spots and then all these storage containers. And so I think the biggest thing was having a lot of people on top of it. And I know I was the one with the title distribution coordinator, but I couldn't have done a single thing without any of the support of people with so much more experience than me. But coming out of like the immediate relief stage, like after those first 3 months, needs changed. And, we didn't necessarily start at the beginning. Like, we kind of knew what the needs were going to go to, but it's tough to anticipate. And so keeping the donations managed, it's tough, because it's like we filled a storage container like the first week, and I didn't even know about it until about 6 months ago. With furniture, let people
know, like,
with furniture, and
okay.
couches and beds that showed up. Yeah. And it's stuff that we've utilized some of it, but I guess it's just something people don't think about, that, oh, the house burned down, I could donate this. It's like, well, there's not going to be a house for that to go into for 2 to 5 years, right? At least. And so there's been constant little things that pop up every so often. I'm like, ooh, this was not our best move here. And now it's a whole week for me to figure out. Well, it's like,
that's a wonderful thing to share.
Like the classic one, and I give Melissa a hard time all the time, because everything that our 15-person team does, she used to do by herself, pretty much. It's smaller scale, but basically. And so she can do pretty much anything. And her favorite thing is to pick up the phone when it rings, and for someone to have a donation, no matter what it is. Her favorite thing is to say yes. And so Jake will figure it out. I'll give you his phone number. And so there's times when I had a classic donations calamity, like a local store was closing, an antique, not an antique, but it was like a boutique, I guess, consignment. And so some nice things, a lot of specialty pieces. And that's not the greatest fit with us a lot of the time. And so and she, the person from the store had called and listed off a lot of the stuff they had. And a lot of the stuff was awesome. I mean, and so Melissa said, yes, definitely, Jake will show up. And so a little bit of miscommunication between us. I thought I had to call them. I didn't show up. I show up later that day, and it's like, oh my gosh, where am I going to put all this stuff? This is mine. And so I had to be like, all right, Jake, I know you're 19, but you need to stand up for yourself and stand up for your organization and tell them, hey, I'm sorry. There was a miscommunication. I can really, really only take the things I can use. So yeah, they had like 100 pictures, framed pictures with our names on it, which, a lot of them were high, really nice stuff, but we have no room to store this and no effective way to get it out,
That's that's really important, because what people don't know is that a lot of donations end up in the landfill, and it's not because the clothes weren't nice. It's not because the furniture isn't nice. It's because what people need is pretty specific. And so you want to, ask what people need. And I know this sounds crazy, but 2 or 3 years later, it's fine to say, does somebody want this couch? Because that might be the much better time for that to occur.
No, that's exactly it. And doing distribution, I think the really other important point is my job position gives me, like, my title is distribution quarter, but distribution is really like my super cathartic break from the really hard things. And it's like it's the best job ever if you really think about it, because I'm starting to take on more things within our office. And it's funny, when I was just out there in the donation center and they were all up in our modular trailer, I was like, dang, I got to get into that trailer, because they have desks and they have sodas and Coca-Cola, and I'm out here with my water, And so, of course, I was always welcome in, but, and so now that I have my desk, I'm like, dang, I wish I was out there like folding boxes right now. And so I get up and I go fold boxes. So, the biggest secret sauce in our disaster was the fact that we had a funder that decided they wanted to fund a distribution coordinator for a year. And it gives me the chance to work with this team, and it gives the team the chance to, okay, let's make distribution your priority. But, it's kind of a hard thing to keep your nose on. Distribution is especially as people are all over the place, they're displaced. Everyone's recovery goes at a different timeline. It's not a one size fits all by any means. So it's given the program the chance to have me to take on additional things like registering people for services. But when distribution comes up, I can go and I can do it. And so, like, it's a capacity theme. Like, I have the time to go organize our donations and the time to, deliver things. And so that's been very, very lucky. We've been just, so lucky to have the funders.
We love the funders.
The funders are cash is king, right? Cash is king. And I think that the last thing about distribution that's been so important to me to learn is infusion of new energy from people. And I'm sure this is like this in all aspects of the disaster and a lot, but having like a new hire of a disaster case manager come in 14 months after the disaster, and they come up to me and they're like, have you tried this or this? Like, I think this would be really exciting. And I'm sitting there and I honestly, I'm starting to get offended a little bit, because like, in my head, I'm like, I tried that 10 months ago. It didn't work. I gave up. And I just tell myself, like, you know what? Take a deep breath. It's not about me. Let's see if we can. And so that's been the biggest thing. Our actual director of our long-term recovery group didn't come on until about a year after the fire. And he has just been the biggest like firecracker of distribution energy. And helping us get, building donations out. So like my biggest thing was like laundry detergent and cleaning supplies for the longest time, but Kevin has really changed it into toilets and sinks and cabinets that come in and help organizing and shoving those out. So it's definitely a team effort. And it's just who has the energy and the capacity. Yeah.
Well, I love that. Actually, that's actually very mature of you. And that's hard for anybody of any age to have a system set up that they have created and then be open to other people's ideas and to see how that might work. So that will serve you your entire life. And I commend you on that, because that's hard for everybody of any age to handle. So that's good. Can you talk to us about what kind of donations do you think in your experience are most needed right in the midst of the disaster while the fires are still burning, because fires
Mhm.
often burn for many, many days, if not weeks.
So a huge one that I didn't have a huge hand in is one that I think everyone knows about is food. We at the site I talked about driving to, they had a local Lions Club. They did 3 hot meals a day, all the way from our disaster, which was Labor Day, up until Thanksgiving Day. So, and it was free to anyone. And so that was huge. For us, it was interesting that the fire was on Labor Day, and so the season really changed really quick after the fire, and it went from blazing summer to our Oregon falls and winters. And so, like, the huge thing we could never get enough of right after were tarps and were tents for whether it was people, hopefully not, but for supplies, pop-up canopies. And then like the super small essentials like personal hygiene things were huge, especially new ones and cases that we could organize. Yeah, non-perishable foods that people could take with them that would store in small spaces, ready to go meals, stuff like that. And yeah, the cleaning supplies was big, and clothing. Yeah, new nice clothing, and that was especially
Oh,
the weatherized stuff was huge.
talk about, I mean, new,
Yeah,
new,
new
new
clothing.
clothing. Yeah.
My favorite donation we ever got was Wilco. Local Wilco like called me, and they had 100 pairs of rubber boots and a bunch of it was overstock, but it was new Carhartt stuff. And it was like, oh my
Wow.
gosh, yeah. Clothing, we had such a fun time with clothing. I think we, between coming in and going out, was at least like 150 pallets of clothes in boxes. And a lot of that was not new, but we had great partners who, once we said we can't use this anymore, they would send a truck and load it up and use it for what they did. So
Oh, that's
yeah,
not
yeah.
that's pretty unusual. We're actually going to take a quick break right now we're going to have a little commercial message, and we'll come right back with Jake Bentz, and we're talking about how to manage donations.
Fannie Mae provides mortgage options for you and your family. If you have a mortgage owned by Fannie Mae, you may have financial options available after a disaster, such as forbearance plans, deferral of payments, lending assistance, and counseling. Find out more from our Disaster Response Network. Go online at www.knowyouroptions.com/relief or call 1-877-833-1746 today.
Okay. And we are back. Jake, so we talked about what was needed right in the beginning of the fire. So we know that, like, other things that you mentioned, like new clothes, cleaning supplies, in our experience, gift cards are really helpful,
Definitely.
but make sure you're not giving people gift cards for places that don't exist around them. We saw that too. You don't want people to have to travel. And, it's even harder to provide an address, because a lot of times people who are fire affected or have lost their homes, they might be bouncing around to different homes. And so figuring out where that should even be shipped. So shopping online is not as effective after a disaster as one might hope. So really, gift cards are awesome. Water, making sure, like you said, we're always amazed by how many people show up to do food. Hot meals are really important. They're also like an act of love, which is very important.
Yeah.
But so about, say, a month or 2 months post disaster, what sort of requests were you getting from fire survivors and people who lost everything, and how were you matching them up with people who wanted to give?
It changed for sure. One thing that I would be remiss if I didn't mention was the generators. And so in the area, there was before the fire, there was a lot of folks staying in full time in trailers and in RVs and fifth wheels. It's kind of it's common in the area. And so that triples, quadruples when a fire burns down. That becomes like the default spot for a lot of folks, is they get a fifth wheel. And so we had a couple used generators donated, and that kind of like made us think like, oh, this would be really awesome. And then we had people asking for them. And so we had corporate donations. I think I gave out our last one we had in a box a couple weeks ago. So that's 17 months in. I think we got over 150 donated. And these are like, close to the $1,000 range in price, each new, and they're all new, and between different distributors for sure. But that was a huge thing, and the corporate came in and was like, made it super easy. But as needs change, trying to match to individual donors, the sort of like things you wouldn't necessarily super think about, but like staying in a hotel or staying in an RV, like the really simple kitchen supplies and stuff like that was a big thing that needs changed, and people tend to actually have a lot of that stuff that's in good quality.
So those don't have to, pots and pans don't necessarily have to be new. They just have to be in very good condition.
Yeah. And for sure. No, pots and pans don't have to be new. Even a lot of like China sets kept coming in the door at one point, and I was a little cautious at first, like, but shocking amount of people lost China sets who all they wanted was a China set back. And so a lot of times someone would walk in and they're like, it was almost exactly the same. I don't know how this happened. And I'm like, was meant to be, your name's on it. So this kitchen supplies. Yeah, that happened a lot. I
have a friend, you might like this, I reminded me of it, Sandra Bernstein, who organized she's a cookbook author. So she was like, oh, maybe what we could do is I could gather cookbooks. And so people donated cookbooks, or they bought them, or they brought them out of their own cupboards to give. And then she had a day like 8 months after the disaster where she invited, it was everything after disaster seems like it's long and short all at once, but sometime after the disaster, she had thousands of these cookbooks, and then they organized them, and then people who were fire survivors could come in and get some of their favorite cookbooks, and it meant a lot to them. So
yeah, it's one of those super specific things that you would not think about at all, but someone cooking out of the same cookbook all the time would definitely would appreciate for sure. Yeah, I don't know how many times I've heard someone who lost everything walk into our donation center and go, I didn't even remember that I had one of those, and it would be on the shelf for them. So that's a cookbook would be an awesome example of that. Yeah.
So you are now about 17, 18 months post-disaster, and the needs are, changing, although people do know, well, if you don't know and you're listening to this podcast, I don't know how you don't know by now, but it takes, years to do this, to recover. It takes years. And so what people need, what are you seeing lately at this stage that people are needing? Because you're coming out of your second winter post-disaster. What are you seeing them need now?
The biggest thing we ask for donations is gas carts. And so I'm sure it's like this in most mega fires with displacement, but for us specifically, a lot of folks are staying probably, it's hard to quantify to miles, probably at least 30 miles away. A lot of them are. And then lucky us, gas is so cheap right now, right? That no, of course it's shot up. And so that's been our biggest ask. And that's probably been the one item we've gotten the most in and gotten the most out of. And so that's been big. It's been interesting. There's been less, it kind of winds down and goes in spurts, but the generators have been big. And then sort of like building materials. And it's something that I wouldn't have thought would have been super easy to fit into people's builds. Like we got a corporate distributor did like 50 pallets, and this was about a year ago, of just random like cabinets and vanities and toilets. And that's sure tough when someone's got plans for their house and every couple inches is planned, and it's like, hey, we have this cabinet, could you use it? But it's been kind of surprising to see how many people can fit things into there, and it helps out their budget. So that's been a really helpful thing. And it's especially the toilets. I know your Pamela has been big on toilets with some of the stuff she does, but
but we're trying to solve for toilets. So we're looking at compostable toilets and incinerator toilets, because where you are in particular, it would change the trajectory of the rebuild for a lot of folks if they didn't have to pay $40,000 to have their septic tank rehabbed.
Definitely.
And septic tanks aren't even the gold standard at all in they leak. They are notoriously problematic. They're not like the best for the environment. So we're trying to get the states to, sign on to the idea that maybe rebuilds, or even people who are not in rebuilds, should be allowed to use compostable toilets. But Pam will love that Pamela Van Halsema from our team will love that she's known for toilets. She will I can't wait
Yeah.
to see that. She will love that. So one of the things I did want to just make sure that we get in here is, you are a young person. You are 19 now. You were 18 when the fires happened. Talk to me about what it's like to be really a leader in your community. A leader. I'm not calling you the only one because you would immediately protest that anyway. Now you do come from a lot of very impressive people. So do you feel like part of that leadership was just built into you, or what was that like to step up into that space?
There's some aspects of it that I think maybe I've always had a small propensity to, big word for 19, right? But
it's a good one though.
It's a great one.
Mm-hmm.
I think the biggest thing was having nothing but time there for a little bit, and just deciding what's the best way to use my time. And it was so we kind of talked about the beginning, but it was kind of fun to go volunteer there with my friends, and it turned into this beautiful thing. But something that I've noticed down the line that's been super big about me being young in this is that although I worked with so many experienced, seasoned colleagues, I might have a little bit more neuroplasticity, like jumping into like some computer thing and figuring it out pretty quick tends to not be so much of a challenge for me. And that's been the biggest thing that's gatekept, like how we can serve people's technology. I mean, it has just been one thing after another, and just being there and being willing to try to tinker with something or get into a computer program, and maybe I already know how to do it, or I could probably figure it out, right? So it's like being under 20. Well, I don't know what the age is right now, but maybe under 30, people just assume you can code, or, you have some sort of unnamed certificate in technology. And it's kind of true, but it's really annoying sometimes. That's been a huge thing.
So you were in the realm of neuroplasticity. Love that. So you were, I'm really curious because you're around people who are older than you. And obviously, you've mentioned that we do, it's true. Anybody under 30, I totally assume has like an IT certificate. So, because I know that you're not only digital natives, but you're also not really quite social media natives, but close enough, right? So
very close.
Yeah. So those things are very helpful to an organization to have that diversity of ages and experiences. But in the space of being a leader, you had the time, you had the neuroplasticity, but did you ever have a time when you came up against somebody who was like, you don't have to name any names, somebody who was like, oh, well, maybe you don't have as much to offer or say because you are, of a certain age?
Not a ton. I think I've been pretty lucky in that regards. People have been really awesome. But when I first started my last year here, that was something I was really nervous about. I was really nervous about what would I do versus someone who has more experience and sees it differently. So even times now when I'm working, I think about, okay, if they would have hired this person who was doing this before this and had this many years, what would they think to do in this situation? And sometimes that guides me, whether it's the best decision. But I've been very lucky. It just being willing to try is I think my biggest takeaway from it. It's like, if you could show up and you can give someone your phone number and they have your name and they know it, it's just being willing to try and help out. And the team's been so awesome. I mean, I've kind of crept into the role of being some, what did I say at the beginning? Washed up 40-year-old, not washed up, but I mean, look at me, I'm wearing a suede jacket on a Zoom call right now, right? But I've definitely kind of crept into that. And for me, it's a very interesting 19th year. I'm doing this awesome work, and then outside of work, I'm like sitting in a cave reading books, I feel like, almost, and trying to figure out what's going on around me. But the biggest gift for me has just been the ability to learn new things quickly, for sure. Yeah.
Well, I do feel like your generation is going to be particularly resilient, and I think that you are, we're all living through extraordinary times, and I know everyone worries about all the children, which of course I worry, and I don't want things to be difficult for you, but I also think that, we have many generations that are not comfortable with any discomfort, and your generation won't be one of those.
There's something there for sure. Resiliency is such a interesting word for me. I feel like there's a lot of nuance, or lacking a lot of nuance with mental health with that. And it's like, sometimes I feel like there's either you have resiliency or you don't, or it's not so much, it's more of a character trait. But I think the willingness to try something new and be wrong is probably like my closest definition of that word. And I would agree. I think there's a lot of us down here, as short and small as we may be and as new to this world, there's a lot of willingness to try. I think that's exciting.
I think, I love that a lot. And it's something that I was talking about in this other podcast earlier, which is that view of tragic optimism. Like, yes, bad things are going to happen, but how are you going to show up to make them better? And the belief that other people will show up alongside of you to also make it better. And we're not looking for perfect, and we're not looking to undo, or we can't go back to the day before, but we can certainly like attend to the problem in front of us. And my thought is that, and I am an optimist, tragic optimist. My thought is that your generation will be able to kind of to roll through those things. I hope with a little more ease and and innovation too. I love that you keep talking about the importance of just showing up. Where did you get that from? Because it's so important. I totally agree.
I got it from not showing up and just being totally bummed that I missed out, I guess. So now I show up everywhere, and I try to show up 5 minutes early. That's my big thing too. So.
Oh my God, that's perfect. So I love that. Is there anything today that you wish I would have asked you, Jake, or that you wanted to share on the podcast?
I might be preaching to the choir, but us in the San Diego Canyon, we're still here, and we still need support and still need help. We're just haven't even hit 2 years yet, and it feels like it's been a lifetime. And I know a lot of us are tired. And so every time that we see a group such as After the Fire come in and affirm us and say, you're doing the right thing, and you guys, you're making good progress, it's really encouraging. So thank you for that. I know, like, when you guys came and took the time to fly up and met with us, I speak for myself, but a lot of the team felt this way too. We had never talked to someone who understood what we were going through, it felt like. And it's so powerful. It's so powerful. And it translates right down to the service we provide to people. And so thank you for that. The people out there, just know that we could still use your help. So go visit our website, please. See what you can do. Yeah.
Yes, they should go visit your website, see what they can do. Also follow you on social media. I'm loving the social media. I'm loving the telling of the stories.
Yes.
I like all over them all the time. And it is just about time for us to figure out our return trip. It's also very gratifying for us to be able to look at people doing extraordinary work. And it's an honor to say, hey, it's hard to see, but we see what great work you're doing. And because a lot of times people are like, oh, there must be people out here who do this perfectly, or who do, doing this just right. We're just doing our best over here. We're all amateurs. But in disaster, most of us are amateurs. It's very unusual for people to walk in there knowing what they're doing. And it's one of the things I think I like the most about it is there has to be room for growth and an entrepreneurial approach to it. And it's okay. I say this in my own organizational leadership all the time. I don't know is actually very powerful, and it leaves you room to learn. And so when we see groups like Santiam Disaster Services, and we witness firsthand the kind of work that you're doing with the heart, then we are inspired and motivated to keep doing the work that we do. So it's definitely a two-way street for sure.
Well, thank you for existing. Gosh, it's so awesome. You're like our heroes. So thank you.
Oh, well, we don't allow heroes or saviors, but we are going to ask you at some point to follow us along to a newly fire affected community. And you're going to have that same experience where you look across the table and you see someone who's just like telling you what they're doing, and they don't know. But you do know. They're doing a good job. And that if we lead with our most humane, most generous hearts, we're pretty much going to be fine, and we're going to do the right thing. And then we learn. And I just think it's really cool that you took this time to, I think it's fine to take a gap year from college. Yeah. And I think we don't allow that enough. And I love the fact that you're having this experience as such a young person, and how that will inform you and your development as you go. I think it's so smart. I just got to tell you that.
Well, thank you very much. It's probably the best decision I've made so far, so I'm very thankful for it. Yeah.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much, Jake Bentz, for being on the podcast, How to Disaster.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for joining us on the podcast, How to Disaster. For more information, please visit our website at afterthefireusa.org. And if you liked this video, please hit subscribe.
Fannie Mae provides mortgage options for you and your family. If you have a mortgage owned by Fannie Mae, you may have financial options available after a disaster, such as forbearance plans, deferral of payments, lending assistance, and counseling. Find out more from our Disaster Response Network. Go online at www.knowyouroptions.com/relief or call 1-877-833-1746 today.